Hi, my name is Joris Luipaert, and apparently I discovered the Garden of Eden in 2017. The Garden of Eden apparently is in Africa. More specifically, it is on the south border of the Sahara. It is in the country of Chad, under Libya, and to the left of Sudan. And at the top of Chad we find the Tibesti mountain range, and inside that Tibesti mountain range there is a crater, and inside that crater we find the Garden of Eden. So if we zoom into Chad, and we have here the Tibesti mountain range. In the Tibesti mountain range we have three volcanoes, ancient craters, and the crater at the bottom is where we find the Garden of Eden. Now, why do I make this public? I want to share this with the world because since I discovered it in 2017, it has really been a burden for me to keep this secret. And I don't think it's meant to be kept secret. Even in Genesis we read that the cherubim or some sort of signs were placed to keep the way to the Garden of Eden, and it was not stated that it was forbidden for man to return to the garden, but that man probably would be allowed to go back to the garden when the time was opportune. And now that we live in the age of satellite imagery, it has become apparent that we can find where the location of the garden is, so there is no longer any reason to hide it. So let's zoom in. Here we find Adam, and we find that it is as described in the Bible. The Bible uses the word Gan Eden to describe the Garden of Eden, and that literally translates to enclosed garden, which we do indeed find here. What a better to put a garden in and than in a crater. Crater here with the crater walls encloses this garden perfectly. Who do we find in the Garden of Eden? Well, we find Adam taking his first breath, and his breath is being exhaled here. That is the face of Adam. But when we look from the other side, we again see a face of Adam. This time he has a more Semitic look aspect, and we see again a breath of Adam. On the head of Adam, well, coming out of the side of Adam as was described in the Bible, because the Bible does not use the word rib, it uses the word coming out of the side of. We find Eve. This is the face of Eve. This is the fruit that Eve is carrying, and in her quiver on her back she is carrying two children. Here this is Abel, and looking Abel with a piercing glance in the back of the head is Cain, who will later in the Genesis story murder his brother. Now when we take this view in the easterly direction, so towards the horizon where the sun comes up, we see something that looks like a tree, because we have two branches extending in the left and the upright direction. And in the middle of the garden, in the middle of this crater, we find another tree, which is what I presume to be the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We also have something that looks like a lion here, which is relevant not to the biblical Garden of Eden, but is relevant to the Egyptian version, an older Egyptian version of the story. And here we see another tree. How did I find this? Well, I managed to relate the pyramids that we have in Gizeh to three individual planets. It was always strange to me that Cairo, the city of the capital of Egypt, literally translates to place of Mars, and when we look at the plateau of Gizeh in Cairo, I wondered if there was another connection with Mars, and I indeed found it. I found that the three main pyramids, this being the Pyramid of Khufu in the middle, the Pyramid of Khafre, and to the left the Pyramid of Menkaure, that the three of them related to planetary gods, and the left is related to the god Menka, which is a Mars god. The middle is related to Khafre or Afre, which is a god for Venus, and the right one, the planet of Khufu, is related to the earth god Geb, so it's related to the planet Geb. Because of other reasons that I found consistent with this idea, I came to the conclusion that the pyramids themselves indeed look like giant arrows that point upwards, and I decided to follow them into the sky. And with my knowledge of astronomy, I was able to link them to another place on Earth eventually. So I noticed that the pattern of these three pyramids is also repeated in the pattern of these three mountain ranges. Here, for instance, we have in Darfur, we have the Maidab volcanic field. This really consists of small volcanoes, which are still have some low activity today, but were much more active in the distant past. Well, distant past, we don't know how far in the distant past, so it can be the recent past. Here we have the Inedi mountains, which could also be a reference to the Ennead of ancient Egypt. And here we have the Tibesti mountain range, where we find in miniature scale another representation of these three volcanoes. And here we have the volcano representing the Earth, the volcano representing Venus, and the volcano representing Mars. Now, interestingly, we all know the Sphinx at Gizeh, but we have another sort of Sphinx here. So if we assume that this little thing here, this mountain crop, represents the causeway at Gizeh in a very old precursor, a natural precursor of what was built in stone by human hands at Gizeh, then we find here these coordinates of 2049 north and 1739 east. When looking in the southerly direction, we find something that has the same sort of bell-shaped aspect of the pyramid of the Sphinx at Gizeh, and so we have an ancient natural version of the pyramid field in Gizeh. Now, when we look at this from afar, we notice a figure that looks a bit like a lion that is lying outstretched. So here we have the front paw, this is the back of the lion, and we have here the curvature of the back of the lion, and here is his head. But if I say that I see the head of a lion, well, and we know that the Sphinx at Gizeh has a human head, then we would expect a human head to be here. But that's not very clear, so maybe it's better if we zoom in, and well, yes, indeed, when we zoom in, we find here the head of a human, and it looks a bit like Cro-Magnon, the precursor of modern man, and indeed he has a very rough looking face, and completely befitting with the Garden of Eden story in Genesis. We see here a person taking his first breath, and in the Garden of Eden story that must be Adam. Now, interestingly, this is in a crater, and the word used in the Garden of Eden story for the Garden of Eden is Gan Eden, which literally translates to enclosed garden. And because we see here crater walls surrounding this garden, we can indeed say that Adam lies in the Garden of Eden, which is an enclosed garden. When we turn this image upside down and now look in the southerly direction, We see again the face of a man. This is his eye, this is a nose, this is his mouth, and this is the back of his head. And he has now a more Semitic aspect to it, like Arabs and Jews and Hittites, ancient Middle Eastern people. And again we see him taking his breath. But now we see on the back of the head of this land structure, we see Eve appearing, and this is the head of Eve. This is the body of Eve. This is the fruit that she's carrying, and these are two shapes on her back, in her quiver, which the closest, in my opinion, will be Abel, and the one in the back, looking attentively at the back of the first child, is Cain, which will later murder Abel. Now, the entire image that we see here measures, let me do the test, about 5 miles across, and in kilometers that gives us about 7.7 kilometers, or a little bit more accurate, 8.57 kilometers. We have to realize that the entire scale, the diameter of this crater, when we look in this direction, is about 20 kilometers. So this is a very big place, and this can only be seen, the details of Adam and Eve can only be seen from the crater walls. When we now look more towards the east, in the direction the sun comes up, we see something akin to a tree, and in the middle of the garden we see another tree appearing, and in my opinion this is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I just wanted to point out where we find the snake. So in relationship to Adam and Eve on his back, the two children on the back of Eve, the breath of Adam, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We see Eve sort of taking the fruit from the canopy of the tree, of one of the trees. I've already showed you the tree in the middle of the garden, and if we go a little bit to the left of it, when we look northwardly, then we find the snake. Indeed, when we zoom in, we find the head of the snake. This is the body of the snake, and here we have what looks like an arm, because there was always a discussion in Hebrew mythology whether the snake was able to walk before God punished it to crawl. Here we have the Eye of Horus, which is related to the Egyptian myth, and if we zoom in, we can really find the eye of the snake and the entire head of the snake. And here I show a drawing. Now, why am I sharing all of this? Well, I was going back and forth between the idea of sharing this or not, but given that many people are dying in this corona period, I think it's better that people know this exists, maybe before they die. There are not only connections with Christian religion or with Hebrew religion, because the Garden of Eden story does not only appear in Judaism, it also appears in other traditions under different names, but that will be the subject of other videos. I want to point out that when we look at the Tibesti Massif from this direction, we see something that looks like a mythical animal here. This is the beak of an animal, this is the eye of that animal, and this is sort of the rough head shape of that animal, and this is in fact the mythical phoenix. Now, the phoenix is also present in my story, and I found it represented within the pyramids at Gizeh, and that I will demonstrate with images in an upcoming video. when we look at the Tibesti Massif from this angle, when we measure from the top of the Tibesti Massif to the bottom, we are spanning about 600, between 500 and 600 kilometers, or some 314 miles. And from east to west, it is spanning about 300 miles. Interestingly, the distance with Cairo is about 1070 miles, so 1717 kilometers, which is a number that is very familiar to many people, but I'll discuss it later. When you look at this Tibesti mountain range, you see something like a monk in side view. That is of course related to the Buddha image that is represented on a smaller scale again in the Garden of Eden area. Now the Garden of Eden, in my opinion, is larger than only this crater, but extends also to this area here and other areas. I also found the cherubim. I showed, for instance, the Sphinx in this view when looking in the westerly direction, and I showed the mythical Sphinx in this view, and they help also to protect the location of the Garden of Eden. So it was never said in the Bible that the road to the Garden of Eden or the path to the Garden of Eden would be forever hidden. It was just simply guarded till the opportune time came. And I think that the opportune time has come now, apparently, because satellite imagery allows us to find it and show it again to people. Now, this is also a very interesting image which is related to folklore in many areas. We see here some sort of carnival figure, and in Indian art this is related to the thunderbird, and also related to the carnival in my areas. They are called the Banch of Jill, which have sort of this sort of wig and gown on their heads. And in Northern American imagery, we see this as a mother carrying a child on her back and feathers on her head. But that is imagery that I will show in later videos. Now, I mentioned the Buddha. Why? Because when we look here, when we look closely, and you have to try this for yourself, we will find here the banyan tree and Buddha sleeping under it. So the tree is in this upright position, and here, where I put my cursor, is the Buddha. Let me zoom in. So this area here is the Buddha, and when I turn the image and now look in more towards the south, in the southerly direction, we find here something that looks like a pagoda, and standing on top of that pagoda we have the Buddha in the upright position with one of his arms outright, and erosion took away the other arm. The quality of the imagery is not better than this, but to point out, it is still an image of about 0.46 kilometers, or in meters that is 416 meters, and in feet that gives us 1515 feet. So it is still a very large image. Now I have other images to show you, which are all related to religion. For instance, this one looks like Moses with his staff, but we also have here something like a snake. Here we have a black figure which looks like Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom and knowledge. Here we have something that looks like a horse and a snake. Here we have something that looks like a galloping horse. So here we have the back of the horse, here we have the front paws of the horse, and here we have the head of the horse. But this of course is much clearer when I show it on drawings. Here we have a mythical lion. This is the head of the lion, this is the body of the lion, this is the tail of the lion, this is the wing of the lion. So we are talking about a winged lion. And we see that also again in this image above the horse we have another image of a sphinx-like animal with wings on its back. So these are all cultural images that we can find in this Tibesti mountain range area. And we even have a beautiful reference to the story of Jonah and the whale. Jonah, who was enveloped in the whale, was swallowed by the whale for 3 days. And here we find indeed a structure that looks like a whale. So when we look at it from the side, we again see a whale. Here we again have in the tail of this whale, we have another head-like figure that again looks like Thoth. So Thoth or Anubis, because they are related, or the dog-like figures are from Egyptian lore, are connected to this whale or fish. So we have connected the 3 pyramids to the Madop field in Darfur, Sudan, to the Enedi mountains, and to the Tibesti mountains. So Madop is Mars, Enedi is Venus, and we find another reference to Venus here. This is very close to the symbol for Venus. So we see the circle connected to a cross-like symbol, which is formed by this area here. And when we measure this structure, it is 26 kilometers in length, and about the circle is about 13 kilometers in diameter again. So these are truly massive structures, which can only which would have taken a very long time for these people to realize that it existed. Okay, so if you're interested in knowing how I discovered all of this, please subscribe. I will explain to you how you can yourself, through mythology, through myth, find the way to the Garden of Eden. I will explain how this knowledge is encoded in the pyramids. I will explain how this is encoded in Gothic cathedrals. I will explain how this knowledge is encoded in the Kaaba from Islam. And I will explain how it is encoded in pictography from ancient Egypt, how they guarded the way to this monument, with this natural monument, with their pictography, with their mythology, with their architecture. So we can indeed say that the Egyptians guarded the way to the evening land, because we know that Tibesti lies to the west of Cairo, and for them it was in the place where the sun set. Yeah, that is what I'm going to keep it at for this video. If you want to find out more, please subscribe, or let me know, because I've written now 3 books on this subject, and I would like to know if you are interested in maybe buying that book, and if publisher is interested in publishing these books. I have 3 books ready, so please contact me with the info you find on my YouTube channel. Okay, thank you very much for this first video, and see you next time.